Okay, we're live. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Jen Schonger from the New Jersey Autism Center of Excellence, the NJACE, which is funded in part by the New Jersey Governor's Council and the New Jersey Department of Health. I'm so excited to be here today with Anat Baniel. Before I introduce her, I just wanted to go over our usual housekeeping notes. We are live on YouTube right now. The recording will be available to watch anytime after this. And once we're all done recording, we'll have both Spanish and English captions shortly thereafter, as well as a transcript. We encourage you to ask questions or comment. Just remember to do so that you will need to be logged into your YouTube account. And as always, we'd love to hear more about you. So if you're comfortable, please feel free to let us know a little about yourself in the chat. So now for our introduction, Anat Baniel is the originator of the Anat Baniel method Neuromovement with a background as clinical psychologist and dancer. Neuromovement is a systemic approach to communicating with the brain through movement and the 9 essentials described by Dr. Michael Merzenich as the rules of brain plasticity that contribute richly to clinical intervention and supported by other leading neuroscientists. Anat evolved her method through working with thousands of children and adults with physical and neurological issues and high-performing dancers and musicians. She and her team are working with schools on implementing the tenets of ABMNM. During COVID, Anat developed an online program coaching parents how to use the 9 essentials with their child that opened a whole new way to empower both parent and child. Anat and her team offer private sessions as the ABMNM Center in Marin, California, and teach practitioner training programs. Anat teaches workshops and speaks at conferences and other venues nationally and internationally, and she's the best-selling author of Move Into Life and Kids Beyond Limits. So welcome, Anat. I'm going to give it over to you now, and then Dr. Torres and Dr. Neil Sharp will also be joining us for the Q&A. So
thank you, Jen. Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here with you and with Liz or Professor Torres. Okay, and with with everyone that's on the call. So the presentation today is going to be about neuromovement, from fixing to connecting, the 9 essentials, and the one brain proposition. When we feel that something is not quite right with our child, or when our child is diagnosed with autism, cerebral palsy, brain malformation, genetic disorder, ADHD, or undiagnosed developmental disorder, we are left with the question, how can I best help my child? How can I know which intervention to choose for my child? From fixing to connecting. When cars or computers stop working, or when sinks or roofs leak, we get them fixed or have someone else do the fixing for us. Your child is far from being an inanimate object. Unlike an inanimate object, your child has a felt experience all the time. This is really, really a very important part to remember, that when we are engaged with a child, trying to have them learn or figure something out, that the child has a felt experience all the time. And the child's brain continuously forms itself in response to its experiences. That means in response, it includes the felt experience, for better or for worse. What most commonly is done with a child that has challenges is to try to get them to do that which they cannot do yet, or they do poorly. And that is the fixing approach. That's what I refer to as the fixing approach. For example, repeatedly sitting a child up that cannot do it by herself in the hope that it will somehow stick, or asking a child who does not speak to repeat the words we'd like them to say. That, what I say to that, and it's, if he could, he would. If she could, she would. So basically, we need to stop asking children repeatedly to do that which they can't do. And of course, I'll get to that later, why that's so important. When a child has challenges in any aspect of their functioning, we are dependent on the child for any positive change and progress to occur. the child's brain has to go through necessary neural processes that result in learning. That means the creation of billions of new connections that organize themselves into effective neural networks, creating what was not available there for them before. It was simply not there before. You may be asking what can be done if we do not try to have the child practice that which they cannot do, and we want them to learn. We will address this question as we continue. Meet Jonathan, a 21-month-old child that was just diagnosed with ASD before receiving his first ABM&M session with me. Jonathan was a maternal twin boy. He's 21 months old in this video. He was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder just prior to the first session. He had no other intervention before he got his first session with us. No eye contact. He refused most foods. He was nonverbal and did not respond to his name. He did not play or relate with his twin or other children. He did, we show some of it in the video, repeated forceful involuntary arching of his whole spine, throwing his head back. He hid under furniture, and as I said, no prior intervention. Just that you have a sense of how we work with the children, neuromovement lessons are usually 30 to 45 minutes long. Jonathan's first lesson was actually 22 minutes. He got a lot of outcome and he was done for that section. We work in intensives of 10 lessons in 1 week. Usually, like the way it's done, 2 lessons of about 30 minutes to 45 minutes, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon for 5 days. And the number of intensives, it depends on the child, and the frequency depends on the child. The video that follows is a 6-minute edit from the 22-minute lesson. So Joe, if you can.
תן לי לעשות את זה כזאת שאני לא רוצה לראות מה אני מקבלת פה. אתה, אוי אוי אוי, אוי אוי אוי, אוללה, אוללה, לך תביט על אבא וחזרה. עכשיו, לך תביט על אבא וחזרה. אתם עסוקים. אני עסוקה. מה אתה עושה מהעבודה?
אני בעיר.
מה אתה עושה בגלל?
אתה
בא לעבודה או אתה עובד עבור?
עובד בשביל זה. ביוניון סקול. פרנלי?
אני חושבת שאני מכירה, אני יודעת שאני או אני אבקש. לא מפריע, זה הכף רגל שלך. זה הכף רגל. יש לך עוד אחת פה, ויש לך אחת פה. כן. כן, בדיוק. כן, כן, כן. כן, כן, כן. כף הרגל, בוא אני אראה לך. אני אוריד את המחלקה, את הגרב, ובוא תראה. יש פה כף. יש אצבעות. בואי נעשה ככה. לא? לעשות רוח או לא לעשות רוח? לעשות רוח או לא לעשות רוח? כן. כף רגל. עכשיו יש לך עוד אחת פה. בוא אני אראה לך. יש פה, ויש פה גרב. אני אוריד את הגרב. ואני שמה את הגרב פה. פה, אתה רואה? שמתי פה את הגרב. כן. ועכשיו... מה זה תפוח? אתה אוכל תפוח? אי. נלך לעשות את זה עוד פעם? כן או לא? תודה רבה. גם בישראלי משהו. תגיד לי, יונתן, סקרן אתה. כן, זה בריא שאתה סקרן, אתה יודע? מי זה שם אתה בביקר? זה סילביה, וזה ברד. סילביה וברד. כן, סילביה. Do hi. Sylvia? And Brad. Yeah. Yeah. בדיוק. בדיוק. תחזיק את זה ביד הזו ותן לי יד הזו. יש לי אליך שאלה. יש לי אליך שאלה. יש לי אליך שאלה. יש לי אליך שאלה.
I'm going to leave you with your experience for a while, and we will return to Jonathan's video later in the presentation. Why isn't it moving? Oh, I have to click on it. Click on this.
That's it. That's the next one.
In order to understand better what from fixing to connecting means and how to apply it, we need to ask the question, what is the job of the brain? The job of the brain is to put order in the disorder and to make sense out of the nonsense. I'll say it again, the job of the brain is to put order in the disorder and make sense out of the nonsense. The brain is an information system, not a mechanical system. It works by very different set of rules than those of a mechanical system. We manipulate a mechanical inanimate object from the outside to bring about desired changes. For the object, no learning takes place. There is no active participation generated by the object. With a child, learning and change is generated by them. Their brain has to create something that was not there before, to figure things out. Their brain needs to put order in the disorder and make sense out of the nonsense. Learning is an act of creation within the learner. We do not have direct control over it. For the child to create in themselves a new way of thinking, moving, feeling, or reacting requires for their brain to get new information to work with. The brain generates information through the perception of differences within the flow of stimulation from the outside and from within. When differences are perceived, a process of differentiation is triggered, creating new connections in the brain. Those new connections may lead to integration of new skills. It's very important to say that the connections, the new connection may lead to integration of new skills, and the integration, the specific content that was formed or the learning that happened is not known in advance, but we can have a sense where it might go. The perception of a difference equals information. At one stage of doing the work and evolving my understanding of it, I thought that the perception of a difference can also be seen as a fundamental unit of intelligence. Because when we do not perceive differences that are needed to be seen in order to figure things out, to understand, to actually perceive it, we just don't have anything there. When a difference is not perceived, it does not exist. An example is speaking underwater. The person speaking may be articulating clearly and using a loud voice. However, the listener hears whoa, 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 and cannot know what is being said. As I said before, if they could, they would. When challenged, the child needs a process that will enhance their ability to perceive differences rather than have them try to do that which they can't. The brain learns its experience, not necessarily what we are intending to teach the child. When we ask a child to keep trying to do that which they can't, they are likely to learn the underlying patterns of their failure. For example, a child with cerebral palsy that is made to practice standing with insufficient differentiation, and each time the child tries it, the legs scissor and the arms become spastic and bent at the elbows. Moving forward, the standing will continue to include these patterns, which will interfere with the child's ability to stand and walk. When a child on the autism spectrum is repeatedly prompted to say certain things or take certain actions, the prompting itself is integrated in the brain and becomes part of the initiation and execution of that action. As a result, the child may require continued prompting rather than develop the ability to form clear intention, agency, and independence in themselves over time. These limiting outcomes are often understood as being caused by the condition, and therefore the limitation is believed to be unavoidable. So people think that the scissoring legs are what happens when you have CP, or needing to be prompted is when we have autism. What we need to question is whether the intervention itself builds in limitation in the child's process of improvement. I'm going to repeat this sentence. It's very, very important for me to observe whether what I do with the child maybe helps them in certain ways, brings about certain changes, but is the process done in a way that it actually builds limitations that didn't need to be created. When I see a child that is challenged in any aspect of their functioning, physical, cognitive, emotional, or relational, I see a huge opportunity. I see possibility. I do not see or try to impose certainty on the child or certainty on what has to happen with a child. I see a brain that needs some help with doing its job in discrimination, that means noticing, attention, differentiation, perceiving differences and the creation of new connections, and integration, spontaneous creation of new neural networks, patterns leading to new abilities. Seeing the child in this way frees us from focusing on the child's limitations and from the urge to fix them, and instead look for opportunities to awaken their brain to differentiate where it is needed functionally. With this understanding, the child's current limitations, as extreme as they may seem at times, are not an indication of the intelligence of the child or a predictor, the prognosis of the child's ability to learn and improve. The limitations are an indication of a disruption in the process of differentiation and the resulting integration. This calls for a profound shift in our approach to the child. We no longer try to fix the child, but rather we join the child to help them become the potent learners that they can be. The how. How do we do this? The 9 essentials. When we apply the 9 essentials, we connect with the child and create conditions that enhance the child's ability to perceive differences, differentiate, integrate, and learn. The first essential is movement with attention. Movement with attention. An experience coupled with attention leads to physical changes in the structure and functioning of the nervous system. Dr. Michael Merzenich. Movement coupled with attention to the feeling of self brings about immediate transformations that make the seemingly impossible possible. When I run workshops or teach a training program, and I introduce the essentials, and the first one is movement with attention, I present to people that it's not, when I talk about the movement with attention, I'm not talking about attention to the teacher or attention to the outside, but the attention, the internal focus on the feeling, the flow of feeling of self as we move. And it usually takes between 2 to 3 days that when I remind people or ask them to tell me what the essentials that they learn, they name movement with attention, and I say attention to what? And it takes 3 days before people really get it. It's the attention to what you feel as you move, or creating conditions that call upon the child to pay attention to what they feel internally as they move. So it's not movement as execution, as exercise, but it's movement as communication with the self. Experiential transformational neuromovement, turning head in sitting. So I'm going to lead you through a very, very rapid little movement lesson to have you feel just what it's like to do a few movements with paying attention to what you feel and the kind of changes that it can bring about. So I assume you're sitting somewhere, and if you happen to be driving, or do not do the lesson because your attention should be on the road. And so sit at the edge of the chair, spread your legs, knees and feet comfortably, and lean on your left hand behind you on the chair. So you take some of the weight off, and I'm going to do it with you so you can see. So I'm sitting at the edge of my chair, I'm leaning on my left hand, I'm bringing up my right arm, I'm freeing my, oh no, mistake here, just 1 second, don't do that yet, just sit in the middle and turn your head to look to the left, and do the movement slowly, gently, and don't push to the maximum range, just easy, lazy. Just kind of lazy. Turn your head to the left, look to the left again, and just feel what it feels like and how far you see. And now turn the head to the right, look to the right, and just notice what it feels like and just what you see as you turn, how far you see. Now lean on your left hand and give some of the weight onto the arm. Lift your right hand arm bent at the elbow. As you can see, my wrist is free. And look at the wrist. And imagine that there is a little stick connecting your nose to your wrist. So the head and the arm are going to move together. And now gently turn yourself to the left and keep looking at the wrist. So the arm and the head all move as one unit. So now you've paid attention to me. And as you repeat this movement, shift your attention and feel, can you sense any movement in your spine, in your back? Can you feel movement in the ribs on the right side? Maybe a little more than the left side. And as you repeat the movement, maybe one more time, notice whether there's some shift of weight on the pelvis, whether the weight shifts a bit and moves a bit over towards the left sit bone. And now, twist yourself like that and stay twisted. And only the head, move it a little to the left or more, and back to the wrist, a little bit left to the wrist, and now a little bit to the right and to the wrist, a little bit to the right and to the wrist. And now keep looking at the wrist so the eye stays fixed on the wrist, and move the head to the left. That means that the head moves in opposite direction to the eyes. And again, you keep looking at the wrist and the head moves to the left. And now keep looking at the wrist and move the head to the right. Keep looking at the wrist and move the head to the right and back. And now look forward, not at the wrist anymore, and actively take the head to the left and the eyes to the right. For in the beginning, so for, it might be confusing a bit. Turn the head to the left, eyes to the right, and notice the feeling in the eyes. And do you feel tightness in the eyes? And just see if you can soften the movement. And now move the head to the right and the eyes to the left. And again, and feel, is there any movement when you do that? Can you feel anything in your back? What do you sense there? I even sense shift in weight in the pressure in the soles of my feet. And now come back to the middle, rest for a moment, don't lean on the arm, and just for a moment, sit and feel how you sit. I'm going to describe what I feel briefly so you have an idea of what you might feel, but notice what you feel. So for me, I feel a lot more up, erect, without trying. I feel a difference in my right side of my pelvis. My right sit bone is clearer on the chair, for example. My right shoulder feels quite significantly lower than the left one, and my two eyes feel very different. And now lean on your, and now simply turn your head to the left and feel how that is a couple times, and notice if you're turning easier and perhaps wider range further, and whether you can sense perhaps more movement in your back, in your spine. And now turn to the right and notice if it's different. And now we stop that. I say that one day I realized working with a child, and I felt like through the movement, I was touching obviously the child and helping doing some movements with the child. And I thought, I'm talking to the child through movement, through the movement. I'm clearly communicating, excuse me, with a child through movement. So I coined movement is the language of the brain. Intentional voluntary movement is the oneness of what we call mind and body. Mind and body are an inseparable whole while functioning. That means while moving. The only reason we have a brain, this is a quote from Daniel Wolpert, the only reason we have a brain is for complex adaptive movement. Movement and the child with ASD. The focus in autism often tends to be on the cognitive, behavioral, and relational challenges the child has. Studies show that up to 83% of children on the spectrum have movement challenges. Studies show that up to 89% of children on the autism spectrum have movement challenges ranging from clumsiness or a mechanical style of walking to more profound difficulties. Of children with ASD, 79% had definite movement impairments and a further 10% had borderline problems. Working with children on the spectrum, I realized that most of them had clear movement challenges, and many of those challenges signified insufficient differentiation. A movement is or can be a mirror to the workings of the brain. With neuromovement, movement is an immediate and powerful way to communicate with the brain and wake it up to shift into potent learning. This next essential is slow. Fast, we can only do what we already know. That is how the brain is built and works. Slow, also when we slow down, it facilitates for us to notice and feel what's going on. Subtlety. Subtlety means the reduction of the intensity of the stimulation. So when you're interacting with a child, let's say again, I'll start with CP and I'll move to autism. When a child has not developed the underlying differentiation and neural networks that require to organize the whole body into standing, which is extremely complex and highly demanding activity, they attempt, if people stand them up, put a walker in front of them or crutches, they are attempting to do it, but with insufficient differentiation. That means clumps of muscles contract and contract too powerfully. That's the spasticity. And under this intensity of stimulation, they don't have the sensitivity to feel the opportunity to feel what they need to do, how to differentiate. So to understand more what intensity does to our ability to perceive, if I go outside in broad daylight and the sun is shining and somebody behind me will turn on a flashlight, I will not notice it. There isn't enough difference between the background to the foreground for me to perceive it. But if I stand in a dark room and I didn't know you were there and you turned on a flashlight, I would jump, I'd be so alarmed. So the idea is that when we interact with a child, we actually intentionally reduce the intensity, reduce the force in which it's done to increase the likelihood that the child will notice the differences. And by the way, once the brain starts noticing differences, it gets better. It's like an underlying skill that drives towards learning. Their brain becomes better at perceiving differences. So anyway, and another way that I consider forcing is a lot of repetitions. It's another a form of intensity of again and again and again. Variations. Variations are for learning as a breathing is for life. I just thought about that when Neil and I were creating this PowerPoint. Variations are the creation of differences. So when a child or an adult or anyone, he tries to do something or you ask them to do something and they don't perform, they don't know how to do it, we have the freedom to generate differences or create variation in the context, in the content of what is being done to facilitate for them to start noticing what is asked of them. Reduction of variations and many repetitions of the same can stop the brain from being able to learn altogether. It disrupts the development of mastery, agency, and empowerment of the child. You can think of variations as mistakes or as play, something that children, when they're well, do all the time. Andy, age 9. He had diagnosed global developmental delays, autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit, poor fine motor skills, unable to write, spell, or read. In addition, when Andy first started getting the ABM and NEM lessons, he did not engage socially with other kids and could not carry a conversation or basically a back and forth, talking. When he failed to write between two lines, which is a typical thing that kids are asked to do when they learn to write, the teachers asked him to write letters inside boxes, squares, yielding more failure and refusal to write at all. By the way, two lines leave a little bit more freedom, right and left. So when he had trouble doing that, the teachers, the feeling is like, I'm going to control it. I'm going to reduce variations. I'll put two lines on the right and the left, line above, line below, that should help him contain the letters inside the box or the square. It didn't work. It didn't just not work. He really resisted even trying doing it altogether. So here's the next video. And just that you know, we're giving you a very, very brief little piece, but I always start the lesson with doing some of the movement work because I find that it upgrades the brain. It gives the child and me a more potent learning brain. And then I went into direct interaction with him around the writing, and we just took a little clip from that. So Joe? So I am writing a letter, and you tell me, what letter did I write?
A.
Exactly. Now, I don't want you to write a good A. I want you to write a really bad A. Write an A that is really bad. Show me. What kind of bad A can you make?
Probably if I did this.
I wouldn't know that's an A. Now do another bad A for me. So it's kind of like an A. Well, if you just do a line, then it's nothing. So it still has to have some of the parts of the A, but make it bad. Oh, it's so hard to do a bad A. How about I do... Is this a bad A?
No, that's a good.
Why is it good?
Because you did all the parts.
You know, if you look at it this direction, it's bad. But I realized, but if you look at it this direction, it's good. I thought I did a bad A. You see, if you look at it in this direction, it does look like an A. You can write any letter you want. I'll have to guess what letter it is. And I'm going to give you a box inside in which to do the letter, but you make sure to not keep the letter in the box.
What?
Yes. But you have to write the letter close enough so I can guess what it is, okay?
Okay.
But do not keep it in the box.
Okay. How come not the box?
Because that's the game. You know, the game you played with Mom a lot is keep the letter in the box. Now we're saying do not keep the whole letter in the box. Just a part of the letter in the box. So I'm going to give you a box. And I want the letter outside the box. The box is going to be different sizes at different times. Don't tell me which letter. Write it, but make sure it doesn't fit into the box. That's the box. This looks like a switched, it looks like a D. Is this a D? Did you mean to do a D?
Yeah.
Is that what you meant to do?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Anat, before you start, can I actually just ask you a question from the audience?
Sure.
Okay. So Cynthia Gloker wanted to know, did you mean it's preferable to create a subtly different environment, which is more difficult to perceive differences? Or is it preferable to create a big contrast to integrate the difference?
That's a really a great question. When I talk about subtlety or reduction of force, the idea is to reduce the force. If I'm the one moving the child, so I'll give you an example. And let's say I am starting to lift the child's arm, right? And there is a tightness in the shoulder. There's resistance to the movement. I will not move against the resistance of the arm. I will go and do other things. I can go more into it, how we can not work on the arm, but really work on the arm through going through other parts of the body, or I don't want to go into a lot of that right now. So I literally reduce the force and I move the person slowly and delicately and within the range that's available at that moment. And without exception, pretty much, in like almost instantaneously, first of all, I might stop, go do something else, I come back, and just the range gets much bigger. Because the brain works with it, it gets information, the child senses the resistance. I can't change that. I can't make the child move. I cannot control them, the workings of the brain or the muscles. But when it's felt inside, things start changing. It's like if you sit and all of a sudden you moved and something presses against your hip, let's say, you notice it, you might look at it, but you move away from it if it's uncomfortable. That's the same mechanism. Now, variations, I create differences, and I create the differences and make them big enough, clear enough, that it increases the likelihood, the probability that the child will perceive it, that the brain will notice it. But I don't do force that. There's a distinction here. I've never even had this question posed to me, so I'm kind of thinking on my feet here. But let's say, I'll give you an example. I remember a child, the first time I saw him, I actually heard him in the waiting room, also on the spectrum, and he was very loud. He was at this high pitch, non-variable, very little variability in the tone and sound, and he sort of made loud sounds, and I came over to take them into the room, and I heard the mother say to him to use his inside voice, and I thought, oh, that wouldn't mean much to that child. What's an inside voice? Anyway, so when I started working with a child, and he did it frequently, so he made this sound, and I said to him, oh, I'm much older, I don't hear very well. Can you make it a bit louder? And I made it louder. So he knew what I talked about. And in that sense, it became pretty intense, but it was in relation to what he was doing. And so he did it. And then I said to him, that's better, but not quite there yet. Can you make it louder? And he made it louder. And it's amazing, by the way, how much children understand more when we join them where they are, and we interact with them and communicate with them in relation to what they are actually doing, not what we want them to do. So anyway, he made the sound louder. And then I said to him, oh, that's a bit too loud. And I said, can you make it a little softer? And then he had an understanding what's louder and softer is. He did it. And then we played with it for a few minutes, and then that was it. He stopped making this really loud sound. It's amazing how that can work. Now, I want to make sure in terms of, managing expectations, it doesn't always work that quick, but changes happen very quick. Outcomes take the time they take to get there, but changes start happening. A cascade of changes happens all the time. I hope that helps. And if it's not clear enough, if you can put it in the chat, and I'll get back to it later. Is that good, Jan?
That's perfect.
Oh, okay. Okay, so on the plane home, without being prompted, Andy asked for and spontaneously spent 2 hours writing letters between the two lines successfully. The mother actually, emailed us, and she was just so excited. Enthusiasm. Enthusiasm, it's the power of amplifications versus the danger of downplaying seemingly small changes. So I love this picture of the girl giving Neil a lesson. So the thing is that when we work like that and the changes start happening, they can be not seem at all related to the goals or the purpose that the child was brought to us. So the child is not looking in the eyes, or can't talk, or can't stand, or has bursts of aggressive behavior, and we worked with them, and all of a sudden they sit upright. All of a sudden, they used to be really hunched, and all of a sudden they sit tall spontaneously, or any other change, but it's not the goal, it's not the purpose they came. There is a tendency to either even not notice it, or to call it a small change, and emotionally, internally, in the adult, to not give it importance, or to even be disappointed. And what I discovered I had experiences over times when parents sit in the room and observe the child and notice that it changes, and they feel happy, they feel well, they amplify emotionally in a positive way, the child learns faster. It's so, and when the parent, I had one parent that I get really, I point it out. For me, internally, I amplified very, very powerfully. And I realized that I do it when I saw what was happening with the parents that didn't do that. And that was the same child. And one parent used to get depressed because there was a long way to go with this child. And those quote unquote small changes were actually an indication for that parent of what's not there, and kind of the anxiety and the concern. And the other parent was the exact opposite. It just happened to be that way. And I noticed that with the parent that amplified internally, it's not about clapping or saying good boy or good girl. It's an internal state that we generate intentionally or happens to us spontaneously. With the amplifier parent, the child was like changing. And with the other parent, it was a little bit like working with a piece of wet cement. And it became so clear to me that for a couple of years, I asked that only the father bring the child. And then as the child got better, it equalized between the two parents. Flexible goals. Beware, goals can be a very fast track to the fixing approach, which of course I basically also talked about in the last slide. Goals are important. They give a context. I'm aware what the child is doing. I'm aware what the child maybe should have been doing had he not, or she had not had their limitations. But the goals don't dominate me. They don't. It's not like and I'm trying to somehow drive the attainment of those goals through the child. It's staying in the here and now and allowing the freedom and the unexpected to happen, and working with the child where they're at. And the other question about goals is, when we try to make the child learn what we think they should know, a big question is to ask, what are they actually learning? Not what because what we teach is not necessarily what is learned. So there's a big risk of reaching a lower bar than necessary when we hit or aim at the goals when the child is not there yet. The goals need to be in the background. The focus needs to be on the process in the here and now, with interest and attention to the child's felt experience. The learning switch. The child is either in a learning mode or not. The learning switch is on with greater or lesser potency, or completely off. Learning is done by approximations, always starting from where the child is at present and differentiating around the edges. what I call differentiating around the edges into greater capabilities around the edges of where the child is, not trying to make big hops. The emergence of new skills always requires the development of greater refinement, differentiation, and complexity in the brain. Imagination and dreams. Imagination is in yourself and in your child. And when your child does not seem to have imagination, there are ways to gradually, through asking questions, creating variability, making unexpected changes, all kinds of ways in which we can awaken the imagination in the child. It's a very important and powerful thing to have. Awareness. Awareness is the glue of learning. And in this case, your awareness is of incredible importance, and the awareness not just of your child, but of yourself. What you feel, what your intention is, how you're moving. Are you yourself embodying this and essentials as you are interacting with the child? And by the way, children are incredibly aware. They might not be, oh, here, I guess I said, the children are very, very aware, and people sometimes don't seem to notice it because they are aware, by my experience and observation, long before they talk. The feeling of safety is a necessity for the child to be able to learn. Shifting from fixing to connecting with the child and applying the 9 essentials within yourself and in relation to the child creates a deeply safe space for the child, thus potentiating change, growth, delight, and joy for all concerned. Second view of Jonathan, and I have where are we on time, Jen? I mean, are we okay still?
Yeah, we're okay.
Okay, so let's show it again with because I think after we ran through the essentials, maybe you guys could see more the manifestation in the essentials in the flow of the lesson. And I did a bit of a voiceover. Watch my hands on Jonathan's pelvis. As he's arching, I'm actually facilitating, helping the pelvis move forward to help him with the arching rather than try to inhibit him. And then I do the same on his sternum and rib cage. I help lift it when and then when he comes back, I gently help bring it back. And then I add to it, look at daddy and come back. That's his brother making the noise. And here I do it again, look at daddy and come back. That means I superimpose an intention on an involuntary movement. And here I continue doing that, but he's actually calming down. Now he's feeling the movement, and you see gently bringing his head back. And pretty much he never did this movement again, not just in the session. Now I'm working on his feet. Very often the ankles of children on the spectrum are very, very stiff. And here I start moving it. He's looking to the side, did a tiny little arching there. And now look at the slowness. And then I point out to his foot. And I said, that's your foot. And then very slowly, I take the sock off and I talk it as I say I'm doing it. And then he goes, I do it too. And now he starts looking at me. And I'm asking him, you want more wind? That's the blowing, or you don't? And now I say to him, you have another one of those, and slowly taking off. And look, his attention is on me. I'm the generator. I pointed the apple at his hand, and the importance of this, I realized that he's not following the apple, so I just drop it. I move on. And here I'm straightening and bending his knees, and functionally what I'm thinking about, aside from everything else, is that the lower back
is not really integrated in the movement of the legs and the pelvis. And look, as I do that, look how the huge shift. And look at the number of variations that I do within a very short period of time. And look at that. You see, and when I pull on the legs, they start moving. That tells me that the brain is intensely responding to what is going on. And of course, if you look at the child's face, he's having a completely new experience. You see, I'm making the sounds, I'm kissing the feet, I'm doing one foot, I'm doing the other foot, and I'm all the time on that one function of helping his brain connect, dynamically connect his feet, his legs, and his pelvis through the lower back and the whole spine to his head. And look at this child. He's just a 21-month-old that it looks like I'm only playing, and he of course starts making sounds, and I respond to his sounds. And now look at that. 8 minutes into the lesson, he's feeding me. And very intentional. Look at the connection that now he can generate. I'm the one that's responsible to continuously be connected to him. And you see, he does a little bit of that stiff movement with the hand and ankle, and then look, we transform it to something very different. And look at the delicacy and the attention and the interest. And that's a learning brain. That's the learning switch is full on. And notice that I'm not fixing anything, like trying to make him do a specific thing, but within the situation, see, this movement requires for the pelvis to twist and the lower back to arch, something that he wasn't doing in the beginning at all, even though he arched involuntarily the whole spine. See, now he's looking at the people that are videotaping. And look at that. He's sorting, he's figuring things out, he's following what I tell him. That's a brain that's doing its job. He even lets me work on his neck. That sometimes can feel a bit intense for children. I have a question for you. Look. And he says, ah. Yes, and it looks just like a silly game. And Jonathan did not have contact with his eyes, and when we called him, he never came. He didn't respond to us, and now he's a completely different kid. He eats better, he responds to what we have to say, and when we call him, he comes. Great eye contact. One more thing is that he can play with other kids, which is something that we didn't get to have before. So big improvement, and talking a lot more, expressing himself more. Words, yeah.
עוד פעם תגיד לי.
3, 2, 1, action. הצלתי לעצמי של הג'וקרים. מי עשה את זה?
בוא תספר לנו באיזה בית ספר אתה.
דווקא, אני בכיתה ב' ואני לומד בבית ספר בילו. שנה הבאה אני עולה לכיתה ג'.
נכון.
ומה שאני הכי מרוגש זה מהקיץ.
מהקיץ? למה?
הקיץ זה הדבר הכי כיף מאוד. אבל בסוף הלימודים זה הדבר קצת יותר כיף.
למה?
כי אז יכולים לצאת ולשחק וללכת לבריכה.
בריכה. אוקיי. אוקיי, מה עוד אתה רוצה לספר?
סיימתי.
סיימת? ביי.
Okay, so the one brain proposition. Please, the video. Joe. The baby dolphin swims in the current that the adult dolphin creates as they swim. By himself, the baby dolphin will sink and die. The baby and adult dolphin are mutually dependent systems with two separate bodies, with the adult dolphin being the leader. The child's brain swims, so to speak, develops in the current of the adult brain. Your and your child's brain are one brain through the connection between the two of you. You generate the current, you are the leader. So what you do, and most importantly, how you do what you do, will be decisive in how well your child can swim in the current that you create, and how well they can learn and grow and create their own current to swim in as they mature. We have the opportunity to impact the process in the brain and the child's experience in powerful and positive ways. Yet we have no direct control on the outcomes. By shifting from fixing to connecting and using the 9 essentials, we greatly increase the likelihood, the probability that the desired outcomes will form themselves and emerge, the same process that occurs with all children when they learn and grow successfully. And that's it.
The next two slides are about it. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, from fixing to connecting, I think that we can talk about it later, right, Jen?
Yeah.
It'll be a 10-week online course for parents, caregivers, and therapists, where we'll work through fixing to connecting and then the 9 essentials. And for information, you can go to anatbanielmethod.com or contact staff at anatbanielmethod.com. That's it.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to come back. And if Dr. Torres would come back on.
Click to exit.
Okay.
Stop share.
There.
Okay, hold on a second. I'm not able to start my video somehow. Oh,
We'll be right there, everyone. And in the meantime, if people have more questions for Anat, Dr. Torres, feel free to post them in the chat now, and we'll get to as many as possible.
So Liz, I am so interested in hearing your thoughts.
okay. So now, yeah, so that was a great presentation. Thank you so much, Anat, for giving us a window into your practices, and a little bit of the evidence that we gather from case studies, which is always very interesting. I remember taking your class in Israel, remember, and then here in the States as well, and thinking how interesting it is that you engage the person very slowly and bring up awareness of movements that we are not often aware of, and that in itself is really rewarding, because we correct ourselves and become aware of things that we wouldn't otherwise. So I thought that when we had that experience back in Israel, that was really illuminating for me as a person that studies movement and initiation and maintenance of movement and coordination of movement. So
Actually, I wanted to bring something up because I think it's really timely for this presentation. So there was just a study published the other day. It's called No Way Out Except from External Intervention, Firsthand Accounts of Autistic Inertia. And we'll post that in the chat. But so they refer to autistic inertia as the widespread and often debilitating difficulty acting on their intentions. And in the piece, an autistic author writes, "To me, it seems odd that inertia is often so far down the list of things that people associate with autism. I find inertia probably the single biggest problem I have that stems directly from it." And I was thinking a lot about this last night because I was doing yoga last night, and the coach like has you slow everything down and like think about what your body is doing in the moment. And then, it seems like the way that you're coaching the parent or directly working with the child, that like you're kind of like your nervous system is kind of serving as a proxy to assist the child's nervous system, and that it's like helping with their body awareness, which then is potentially like helping their nervous system to make the stronger connections. Is that like sort of in the right direction?
I think 100%. So, I've been doing this work now for a long time, and I will even start give an example of an experience with an adult that had a pretty severe brain trauma from a car accident. Very brilliant man in his early 50s. And one of the things that happened is that whenever he made bigger efforts or got a little more nervous, or whenever there was more excitation in the system above a certain level, he would get really violent clonic movement, this repetitive bend and straighten in his left leg. And what I do is I gauge myself to touch him and move him. First of all, I go, way away from the leg. I mean, I'm not trying to, force the leg to stop, because all I'll do is I'll make it worse, and I'll increase, also the spasticity will increase, because that signifies a loss of inhibition due to proper differentiated inhibition due to loss of connections. You lost brain cells, right? And so on. So, and then I work with him at a rate and at a speed that doesn't pass that threshold for him. And as I work with him like that, I assume, because things change, so his arm couldn't come above the head, and his left arm, and it was painful for him in the shoulder. So I worked with other things and areas that require that have less ability to differentiate to begin with, like the torso. I go where there is less relative loss, but every part of the body is connected to every other part, no matter what movement we do. It all has to be accounted to. So I can work on your left shoulder, doing something with your pelvis. I mean, in my head, right? Because I know that it's related. It's just an element. And what happened with him is that, and then it builds new connections, and it builds more the ability for differential inhibition. The parts that shouldn't be excited don't get excited, right? What happens to him with the clonic movement? And within within lesson to lesson to lesson, he was able to handle more intensity without it like becoming clonic movement, having clonic movement. That means that there's much more control and mastery in there. Same thing with the child on the spectrum. Their brain is, they have a great brain. I mean, when I work with those kids, I think very often that they're brilliant because they are able to still do things despite missing some of the underlying, processes that to work well enough for them. So it's not like they're not intelligent. It's just they're working with a smaller deck, so to speak, because differentiation gives you more and more elements and abilities and complexity to work with and to create refinement. So when you talk about the initiation, like they start doing something and they don't want to do it, but they can't stop themselves and they go and do it, right? That's what you're talking about, right, Jen? It's similar to.
They said it was hard to stop.
Yeah, but when somebody has clonic movement like that, they cannot stop it themselves. They try, they push, they press, but it has to, to die down in its own rate. So it's the same thing. It's the movement that Jonathan did in the video. And, when he came in and the father held him in his arms and, and he was safe, and his back was to me and he arched and came back. Archie, I could time it. He could not stop it. And you saw towards the end of not even the end, very quickly, it stopped because the whole functioning of the brain shifted. Yeah. Now, Liz can do the analysis or the research to say exactly what happens. I look at it, from a top view, but I see that, so to answer, I am a proxy. I'm more than a proxy. I become one with the child. I know where I am. I know what I feel. I don't merge with the child, but the way I feel it, I lend my brain to the brain of the child because we do become one brain. If I operate on a higher quality, and I believe the essentials summarize, what's at least some of what's behind doing that, the brain of the child starts sort of rides my stream. So their behavior, it's amazing. People oftentimes say to me, you can do anything with a child. They let you do anything. It's because they're not letting me do anything. It's like we're one and it feels good. Do you want to say anything about that, Liz? I see you smiling.
Well, it's. I love the analogy that you brought with a dolphin, with the mama dolphin and the baby dolphin, because it creates that room. Motion creates that room that enables the little one to come in and welcomes the little one to come in and follow the bigger one. So that room, creating that room is very important. And what I find about what you're doing is that, and I was telling Jen right before we started today, is that even though is movement that comes very close to the person and the very personal space of the person, it's not invasive because it works at the speed of the person. You assess what that is, and it goes into a way that doesn't violate the person's moment, the person's sensation of that moment. And so you have a way to respect that, and that creates that room to attract the baby dolphin. That's what creates that room, that brings it in, and then you entrain with the person, your brain. You're very right saying that it's like your brain becomes one with the brain of the child, because once that happens, once you open the door to create that room, then this entrainment occurs and you have a better chance to connect and to guide without interfering, without actually violating the space of that child, which is very important. And I can't stress it enough that therapies should consider, in autism particularly, should consider these subtleties, these speeds, these motion. Motion is a language that everybody understands from birth. And so a motion that is too fast, too jerky, is threatening. It's a threatening motion, and it will bring anxiety, will bring stress to the child. But a motion that is smooth and slow, and that goes with the rhythm of the child, the natural rhythm of the child, which I noticed that you do pay attention to, and these are things that happen unconsciously, and it's very difficult to explain. It probably is even very difficult for you to explain. The only reason why I know about these is because putting sensors on people give me a window into this hidden world, microscopic world of what's happening that is hidden to the naked eye. And I know that, in fact, your rhythms do entering with their rhythms. And in that sense, the two brains become one. It's not science fiction. It actually happens. It's quantifiable. We've shown it in our papers and so forth in other contexts. So this is something that I really like about your approach to the movement intervention therapy.
Yeah, I love, I love what you say. And I always, when I listen to you, I just keep learning. I just, oh yeah, this too. Oh my God, this is great. Anyway, it's so exciting for me. But, and I want to sort of move on. So, going to, when I work and when I do what you say in train, with a person, I'm really aware I'm doing it. It's not like it happens and maybe I see it later. Not only that, when I don't in train, it's like a loud, somebody's yelling at me, it's like, it's disruptive. So, and it's not something I knew to do, at least not intentionally, before getting trained myself. And that's where the opening is, because we train people to do it. And one of the elements of learning something is realizing that it even exists, that the possibility exists.
Right.
So I think that by even you and me talking here, and people, they say, oh, I have no idea, what is she talking about? I don't feel it. But if one brain can do it, another brain can do it. Right? So and I didn't put it too much in the PowerPoints because it was getting too much. But when I said that I see possibilities, so when I see a child that has any kind of limitation, it can be in movement or in anything, I immediately see the opportunity where there can be differentiation that will facilitate for them to do it. So I'm complete. For me, I'll say that I've been asked many times by parents, will my child walk? So when I was asked that the first, time, I went inside and I said, will the child walk? And what I got is, I have no idea. But they were there and they were anxious and they were paying me and they asked me the question. So I went inside again and I said, what can I tell them about where their child will walk? And then the only thing I knew is that, and I felt it, if I tried to answer the question, oh, maybe in half a year, maybe in 5 years, anything like that, first of all, I'm disconnecting from myself because that's a lie. I don't know when the child will walk. But also, if I think of when the child will walk, I don't know what to do with the child. I have no idea what to do. It's not an option at this moment, but I know the process. I know how to connect. So what I said to the parents, I don't know. And you don't know, and nobody knows. And we're not going to impose it on ourselves or the child. And in therapy, so often they say, they should in 3 months do that, in 6 months do that. And you know what? I feel it's really unfair to the therapists because it calls on them to not be fully connected to themselves. That means they lose the resources of their own intuition and their own ability to entrain with the child, because all of a sudden they're supposed to make it to stand, make it walk, make it talk, make it look in the eyes, make it say good morning. I mean, whatever it is. So,
and it's also unfair to the child in the
Yeah.
first place,
Oh,
because
of course,
because the child, so the goal of a therapy should not be compliance with what you're expected to do and to have the child do. The goal of the therapy should be to have the child self-realized and self-discover.
Exactly.
That's the empowering of a therapy. The empowering of a therapy is when the therapy actually allows a spontaneous emergence, self-emergence of certain features that the child self-discovers. What a therapist can do and should do is work with what the child has already self-discovered when it arrived in the clinic. And I think you do that a lot. And I've seen you in the process of discovering what the child already can do. And that's your entry point. And I think this is also part of the reason why what you're doing is so successful for these children. But definitely it's at the child's own pace, not at the pace of a particular goal of an intervention. That is an arbitrarily determined goal that has nothing to do with that child in front of you. It has nothing to do with the capabilities, the predispositions, and the genetic makeup and the phenotype of that child. It has nothing to do with that. If somebody decided one day to say, okay, so this is appropriate, this is inappropriate, and this is how we're gonna do it. Well, thank you very much, but suit yourself with that, not the child. You're not serving the child's nervous system, and because ultimately the autonomy of that nervous system has to be self-discovered. That is what autonomy is. That is all about the agency. Is all about that. That's what agency is about. It's self-discovered. That's the empowerment, the ownership of what you're doing, because you self-discover the consequences. You didn't have somebody discover the consequences for you and tell you, you're going to do these because I say so, because I say these are the consequences that matter. And this is the antecedent that I'm going to try and train you to do. That is completely opposite to autonomy and agency and volitional control of the person. So avoid those types of therapies. They are not going to work, because ultimately that child will always depend on your prompting and on your telling them to stop doing something or initiate doing something. And you're not always going to be there to do that for your child. Your child needs to be independent, truly autonomous. And that's why therapies should aim at discovering that autonomy, that self-initiation of the child, that self-realization. And that's the part that is actually quite rewarding for that child, quite rewarding to that child. And so it's not something externally determined by somebody.
Society or parents or whoever else. It
Yeah.
has to be.
And I love watching Anat, interact with people. I've seen it live, and you've also done it to me, so that I understand. We've done it as an exercise, as a research exercise, so I understand what you're doing. I get a sense of what you're doing, how it works. That's how I do everything I do in my research. I experience it myself to understand it. And when I experienced your therapy, I got the power of it. I got why it's so effective. And I've done other therapies as well. And I can tell you, I know why that is not going to be effective. What we ought to do is also put sensors on, and we're working on it, right? And
hard, very hard,
but we'll get it done so that we quantify, digitize it, and show the world, okay, this is what's happening in real time.
Yeah. Wow. I love listening to you. Anyway, and it's kind of like you and Elat get me thinking.
Well, I love watching what you're doing, because when you do
Thank
it
you.
and how you interact with the kids
Yes.
and the adults as well.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
want to sort of do a few little differentiations in relation to what you just said, because you said when you do it for them, then I mean, how should I say it? When I see somebody walking a child, moving their legs, or sitting a child up that can't sit up, and they say the child sits, I say, no, they don't. You see, we don't learn to sit up. Or let me say it even more dramatically. We learn to stand up lying down. We learn to stand up on rolling to our belly. We learn to stand up crawling. We learn to stand. We don't know we are learning to stand up.
Right.
But all these, billions of connections and gazillions of neural networks end up being present. And the first time the child stands up by themselves, they don't know they're standing up. It's by the way, a mistake in the outcome of their intention. The first time the child sits up, usually it's because they intended to roll to their belly, but they brought the head too far forward. Or, the first time we do the new thing, we don't know we're doing it. We did not intend to do it. Yeah. So we don't learn to do the thing that we're doing that people want the child to do. That's why it's so clumsy, the other way of going about it.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
I don't teach children to stand up. I have a goal. I have a huge goal. I have it's a multi-layered goal. But the fundamental thing is to connect with a child and to help that brain wake up, potentiate, because the brain can get potentiated more and more, or depotentiated and get, clumsier. We do it every day. We get really tired. We drink too much wine. Whatever. We don't have as good a brain as when we slept, ate well, and we're, feel loved and we're ready to go, right? We have two different brains. We do the movement lessons that my work, in the experience, my brain certainly works better after I do those lessons. So there's a process of internal upgrading of the quality or the potential with which we operate. And I know you sit in your sensors, if I understand it correctly, right? In the analysis of your sensors.
Yeah.
So when the child is walked or set up, it's not just that first of all, in my world, they're not doing it, because the transition from lying to sitting has all the information in it to be able to sit. The transition from sitting to standing has all the information in it to be able to stand. But if somebody puts you standing, first of all, children get terrified because they don't have reversibility of movement, and the floor feels really far, and they're afraid to fall, which they should. So they get more tight, they get more held, the brain is busy with unsafe, as you say, and so on and so forth. The really thing that really for me is painful to know and to feel is that when that is done, when the kids are stood up or, yanked or, stretched, I don't know, whatever, or prompted, it's such a missed opportunity. That time can be used for real, healthy, harmonious growth within that child and their spirit. And it's not just like neutral. It has a negative component to it that I find would be great to change.
I wanted to add to this too, that the over prompting is pervasive in every autism intervention. And ironically, what ends up happening is that because the kids don't have the opportunity to self-discover, as Liz says, and to, attain that agency, they then are prompt dependent. errorless learning and errorless teaching is done as if that's a good thing. Clearly it's not helpful. And so long term, people have more problems with initiation, and they do become prompt dependent. And so much of that is because of how they are being interacted with by
Absolutely,
so-called
Jen.
experts.
And by the way, this is part of the intelligence of their brain. You know, they can't know before they know how to do something that parts of what is occurring as they experience it is not the real part. You understand what I'm saying?
Right, like
So,
it becomes part
and,
of
and
the-
since they don't know how to do it, and like Liz said, agency is an experience. It's that's why children, you know, they get so proud. The little child, they give this example. It's so simple. Takes a piece of paper for the first time, has a marker, and just scribbles something on it. You know, very undifferentiated, you know, rough little movements like that, and runs with it and says, "Mommy, mommy, look what I did." You know, and you can look at it and say, "A big deal, right?" But it's a huge deal. It's a huge deal for the child. And they discover that they can impact the world. They can. It's also the development of intention. There's a lot of people I work with that their function of intentionality is messed up. You can get messed up in a variety of ways. So it's
I think that people who take this big step in life to become a therapist of any kind would greatly benefit. And it's a big step because you're intervening, you're trying to change somebody else's state, right? A state of mind, a state of the body. It would benefit them.
responsibility too.
Yeah.
what did you say, Jen?
It's a responsibility.
Yeah,
Responsibility.
right. It would benefit them to learn what happens in infancy, what happens from the day that the child is born, in the first 3 months of life, the transition to the 4th month, and throughout the first year of life. I recently checked out a book. Actually, I have it in my dining room. I don't have it right here, otherwise I would show you. But maybe I'll go and I'll show you. Anyways, where this is done from day from birth to the first year of life. Every month, the book goes through every month. It's out of print, unfortunately. But there you learn how movement occurs, how movement develops, how the child follows all these stages. And in the first 3 months, it's very interesting because the baby remains still in all the flexor
The
muscles
flexors are working. Yeah.
are still like in the womb, like that. And then the anti-gravity muscles start to develop, so that he starts having extensor muscles and start extending the arms out and the legs out, and they starts differentiating the different parts of the body. And this happens throughout the first 3 months of life. And it's a very good indicator of what is progressing and what is not. If you arrive at the 4th month and you don't have the proper extensors developed to give you, for example, support of the neck and the shoulders, which is very important for you to put your hands in front of you and support the upper body, and then begin to move the legs and discover your legs and so forth. So what Anat was saying about the baby that is rolling and learns to sit and then learns to stand and so forth, of course, the baby doesn't know that he's explicitly doing that. He's learning by trial and error until it gets somewhere to a goal that the baby self-discovers, but nobody's telling that baby what to do at that stage. It's all self-generated spontaneously. And you can certainly guide the baby, particularly when it's a baby that is lagging in these motor milestones that are so important. But do it very carefully that you don't cause damage, that you don't cause harm, that you don't cause trauma from stressing that infant too much too early, and then becomes harmful instead of a therapy.
Liz, can I say something here? Yeah, because you know, for two things about the flexors, and then gradually around between 3 to 4 months, the extensors come to you wake up in terms of the brain, because the extensors are there. It's the brain that's not activating.
Yeah, because you change from the womb environment to the, and now you have to have the anti-gravity.
The gravitational field.
Yeah.
I get that. But that's why for years and years now I said, do not do tummy time. It's insanity to do tummy time. Now they do tummy time a week, 2 weeks after the child is born. And it's disruptive to the system. The babies are screaming, they're very often crying, suffering. Again, that's a whole other idea. If you do it sooner, you'll get smarter in the end, which is exactly the opposite, or at least not the case. But the other thing I want to say, if a child is not starting to do the movements that they're supposed to do, you know, because they don't just lie on their belly or go from nothing to lying on the belly. And by the way, it's the integration of the movement of the eyes, the tracking and the twisting of the head, the twist the spine. And at a certain point where the right age, they flip, because there is the involuntary contraction of the back muscles. But if the baby doesn't do it, I want to bring it a bit back to what I talked in the presentation. That means that for whatever reason, could be something that happened in the womb, can be sometimes can be that they're held too much. Sometimes it can be that the floor feels too hard for them. I mean, who knows why? But it means that the differentiation that is required in that movement that twists the child to come to their belly is not there. Now, we don't necessarily know, and certainly somebody who's not trained would not know, but one of the ways because again, it's self-initiated, it's not done from the outside. I mean, I can take a baby and put it on the belly because they're little and I can do anything with them like that, but it's not really being done. Is for the parent, and I'm going to plug it here, that's part of what we do in our coaching. Because of COVID, I had to find a way to get the child to get some of what they need, right? Even though we're not with the child. And it's working really well. They don't do what I do, but you introduce more random, what would have been random movements. You see, for me, the reason a child with cerebral palsy, and basically the same thing with autism, does not do certain movements, right? But in CP, it's very clear to demonstrate it. Damage to the brain, muscles are overly spastic, you know, all children are flexed for a while, right? But overly spastic. And the spasticity does not allow for the unintentional random movements to occur. So it's not that the brain is not good enough or that their muscles are not okay. It's the lack of variability. It's the variability, it's the randomness, it's the richness of the different twitches and movements and reflexes and all that stuff that gives the brain all the differentiation and the opportunity to start putting things together. So if you put a lot of force with a child on CP and you stretch their muscles, they'll get more spastic. That has to do with the stretch reflex. So that's, you know, so I won't go into that. But if you do really gentle things, again, where the child is, you spoke about it really well, go to where the child is, and there, do a tiny little thing here. The brain doesn't care if it's big or small. Once it's done, it's done. It's a new thing. So you do a little of this, a little of that. You slow down, you narrate what's happening, you bring in the awareness, and you do it 5 minutes at a time, 10 minutes at a time, not 8 hours a day. If you have to do something 8 hours a day, never do it again, right? Because that means the brain is not doing its job. The brain creates 1.8 million new connections per second when the children learn, right? That's kind of research, something that estimates. And just bring in the richness to that is missing. But you start the richness not by trying to do the outcome, because when you guide the child to sit, you're already trying to sit them up. But if the child really can't sit, the head falls, or they flex really hard, or they get scared, or whatever is happening, don't sit them up. Do different things lying down. Put them on your own body, roll with, I mean, just create variability, and that alone will make things work better.
Yeah.
You know, otherwise we slip right back into trying to make that child. And I loved what you said about, I say the child does not owe us to do anything. You know, once they're old, once they're older and they can function, there's society and there are things that is okay to do and not okay to do. But it's not their job to take care of us. And it's very, very important to know that. And then we can honor them and connect with them.
I agree. So
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Anat. So I think that's a good segue then, because someone was asking that they said that their daughter is already 15 years old and they wonder if these techniques can work for her, and they'd like to know more about the 10-week course. So maybe you could tell us about that.
Well, first of all, the oldest person on the spectrum that I worked with, the oldest person I worked with was close to 100 years old, but the oldest person, as long as you have a brain, the brain is built to learn. The human, we are 100% dependent on learning. This is a biological thing about us. And it's true that we tend to learn less and less as we age, but it's not because we couldn't learn more, continue, right? 15 years, of course, and it's easier and better to start younger. We all know that, and that's also the fact. However, 15 years old, of course. I mean, if I thought I had 2 cases in my career where I backed off from working with it. One was a child that missed most of his cerebral cortex, you know, and he responded really well to my work because it worked on the lower centers and it impacted, but I didn't feel there was learning happening. Maybe I was early in my career, maybe today I would feel different. I have no idea, but that's how I felt then. And the other one was a child that was 11 years old, and he had also a seizure disorder, and he got seizures every 3 to 5 minutes. And he would change, we would connect. He loved it, by the way. And then he had a seizure, and it was like an eraser. And I just felt like I didn't feel it. I could, you know, take money and give him lessons. I didn't feel that's 2. And I worked with lots and lots of children. So yes, absolutely. And we work with children at that age. And I started saying 31 years old. And he used, I don't remember how you guys call it, but you know, the mother helped a little holding the end and a little piece with the letters really fast. And she could speak what he was saying. And it sounds like bragging, but I think Neely were there maybe, or I don't know. He at the end of the lesson, he said, "She understands me better than anyone else." At the end of the first lesson. So he could express the feeling of being joined, the being gotten. And you know, they live far away, so she did more of the work in Colorado, and I don't know how that progressed. I didn't follow up on it. So yes, by all means. And the course, what it will do is it will be, I think on Mondays, I don't remember, but I think it starts on the 13th of September, and I think it's a Monday. And I will be with the group for 2.5 hours, and I will focus just on fixing from connecting, the different ways. What does it mean? How do you go? So you get more familiar with that. And then in the middle of the week, we will meet with a group, and I'll have my co-trainers and so on with me, and we'll do breakout groups so people can go into small groups and ask questions and clarify and so on. And then the following Monday, we'll start with the first essential, and that will repeat itself through the 9 essentials. and we will give you ideas how to practice it, what to do. There'll be conversations with people, and bringing the essentials into the life with your child. And by the way, people then bring it into their life in general. I've had couples that say that their marriage gets better, things like that. I hope that answers that question.
Thank you. And I put the link in the chat for anyone who might be interested. And let me just see. Someone else had said that sensory integration, as well as Stephen Portage's polyvagal theory, had come to mind when you were describing.
Absolutely. I mean, both, and Stephen Porges 100% talks. He so is on the issue of safety. We our job is to stay alive, so and how that relates to the availability to learn and the potential, and how potentiated the brain is to be able, because the children we work with, they do have challenges. It's not made up. So they need extra good conditions. They need more of what works for healthy children. I came to the essentials by comparing adults to healthy children. That's how I did it. And then, of course, thinking about the kids I work with. And what happens to children, they have challenges. And healthy children do the essentials. That's how I extracted it from that. It's look at a small child that runs around and plays for 5 minutes and understand variability. That's if a child gets very grooved in, compulsive, it's a obsessive compulsive disorder, right? I mean, we expect a healthy child to have variability, but when we work with a child, we kill off variability. How is that supposed to work?
Yeah.
And that's just an example. Yeah, one example. Yeah.
One other comment, and maybe this is a question for Liz. So S. Jones said, is there any available research regarding the brain connection between mother and child? And I know Vikram Jaswal did a study about the way that mothers perceive their children, and, how they can really establish connected, attached relationships through basically assigning social intention and, intentionality period to their children's behavior. But do you know of anything else, Liz, like as far as?
No, not necessarily in the research domain, but we were doing a project in the lab that was inspired by this, funny enough, for this commercial, and it was a commercial in Spanish where you have, I mean, there is research in like perception and emotional, like all those studies with the mom and the child where they do the still face. So those are, but in terms of the movement, entrainment, and so forth, I'm not aware. There is earlier studies by Trevartin and the group in Europe that did a lot of the, particularly in East Europe, that did studies of infants and mothers, and there is a little bit of research on that, but it's very descriptive. So it's not of the kind quantifying the emotions. It's more like describing them. So there is some literature definitely about entrainment and mother and child or father and child. I would have to look in the literature and get back to that person with papers. There was one that did measure very early on, I believe way back in the late 70s or early 80s. It was published in the Journal of Science by someone at, it was at Boston College, who did a study, it's fascinating, of movement and voice entrainment of the newborn. And within the first few weeks, the newborn would recognize and entrain to the voice of the mom. And he did it with, this was the first study ever with microfilm that actually took frame by frame and demonstrated it. I can give this person the reference. I don't have it in front of me. I don't memorize these kinds of things, but I can totally give a list of references on these studies of mother and child. The one that we were going to do had to do with the heart, because the baby listens to the mom's heartbeat in the womb, and so the idea was to see how the infant would relate to the mother's heart when we sonify the heartbeat and play it back as music, which we can do. We can sonify and turn that biorhythm into music. And we were going to do that inspired by a musician, a jazz musician who did this with musicians. He took their heart rhythms, sonified them, made them into music, and played them back. And they were able to identify their own, the music that contained their own rhythm. So we wanted to do this with mother and child and see how the child would recognize the mom's heartbeat and so forth for therapeutic purposes, because then we could use it as a musical background to soothe the whole entrainment and encourage it and so forth. But we can search for those papers in the early 80s and so forth that did quite a bit in Europe, understanding the relationship.
I wonder if there's some developmental research too, because it's like
this is in the developmental field,
it's
psychology.
like a known thing that if you like sleep near your baby, it helps regulate their breathing and their heart rate and all of that. So maybe somebody must have done something to.
Yeah, actually there is some new studies. There are some new studies, but there are kind of ongoing at Columbia University, and I can't remember the name of the lady, with infants. That is a study in attachment. You know, when moms had to leave the baby in the NICU, so they would provide the baby with cotton balls with the smell of the mom, and that the mom would collect during the day, and they would put there so to soothe the baby. But I can't remember the lady's name. We can answer properly to this person with all the literature.
Okay, one follow-up question.
I just want to say very briefly, when I talk about, you know, the parents or the caregivers or the therapists learning to apply the essentials as a way, you know, to enhance everything, it's really, really important because of the last question that was asked. And I don't know that really important that the parents don't feel like guilty or something's wrong with them or that they caused it or they should have known, because we really don't know until we know. And one of the wonderful things about the work with children that I found that when the new way, the alternate way that works maybe better for the child is used on a regular basis, consistently, reliably, children really heal. They really get happy. You know, one of the things that parents say most often to us is, my child is really happy, or my child is happier. And it's also true in the home. So it's almost like children are ready to be happy. They're ready to learn. They're ready, but they are, you know, they need our support. So I just wanted to make that comment. Back to you, Jen.
Okay, no, that was really helpful. So the last question was kind of a follow-up and says, do you know of any studies on attachment theory that address these connection issues?
I have some literature, but I'm not the kind of person that remembers people's names, but I just get kind of, the way
when we post this,
we'll put,
you know what, we can post it in the Facebook event that we have, and that way everybody can go back.
It's a terrible thing for for a researcher to not have a good memory for names because
You
I
have-
have the
you have
same
plenty to
problem
keep
and I'm
track
not a
of.
researcher.
but I'm terrible about that. But yes, there's definitely research, and I will gather some papers so that the person, yes.
Okay, perfect. And then I'll just give a shout out to Susan Lambert, who's one of our friends, who her daughter wanted to say, I found ABMNN at 17. It heals mind, body, and soul. I continue to practice, learn, and share this work. Anat, you really get us. So on that
Thank
note,
you.
And I met Anna
Anna,
personally,
yes.
and we got a wonderful experience. We had a wonderful experience with her as well. So I can attest that.
Yeah, I didn't even think of you. I don't think of you anymore. Like when I was asked whether a 15-year-old can be helped, you didn't even come to mind because you're just doing so well. But boy, oh boy, I mean, you blossom. We love you.
all right. Well, I think that's all we have for today. Anat, we're so happy that you joined us and we got to learn all about this. And we will have the captions up probably in the next 24 hours, as well as a transcript in the next 24 to 48 hours, I'd say. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And we'll be back next week with a pre-recorded webinar with 3 lovely people from We Are Like Your Child. So I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you so much for having me on your webinar. I really am. I love it.
And I hope to see you in person, Annette.
Oh, soon. I was actually on the East Coast, but just last week to visit my daughter, who I haven't seen for over a year and a half. But next time I go to the East Coast, I will head towards New Jersey.
Okay.
Love you guys.